If you could ask God for whatever you want him to give you, what would it be? If you could ask God for anything at all right now, what would you ask him for? I know it's kind of a trope, right? But just stick with me for a second. Think about how would you answer that question? What would you say? If you could have anything you wanted from God right now, what would you say? A room this size, I'm sure there are lots of answers, right? Some of us might say better health or a relationship, love. Maybe our answer would be money or easier kids, more sleep, respect, success, friendship. What would you say? What's the thing that's most important to you? What is it? Now, if you're like me, my answer to that question changes all the time, right? It depends on the day, it depends on what's going on in my life, the season, the year, it changes all the time. That answer, it varies. And yet, as I've been thinking about my own answers to that question, if I'm gonna ask you a question, I should think about it myself. I've realized that there's always kind of an answer underneath the answer that I give to that question. And I suppose this is going to be unsurprising to you, but the thing that's always kind of underneath whatever the answer is for me is that at the end of the day, I just want to be happy. At the end of the day, what I want most is I want to be happy. Now, not circumstantial happiness, although circumstantial happiness is great, but like a deep kind of lasting happiness. My guess is that you can relate to that. So also can college students at Yale. Maybe you've heard us share this story before. I'm gonna share it again because I think the point is worth repeating, at least for me, if no one else. But the story goes like this. A few years ago, Dr. Laurie Santos, she offers a class at Yale for the very first time. It's called Psychology and the Good Life. And the purpose of this class is to teach these students at Yale how to lead a happier, more satisfying life. Now, the thing about the class is, by the time that registration closes, almost 25% of all Yale undergraduates have registered for the course. It quickly becomes the most popular course in Yale's history, which I guess kind of makes sense, right? Because they're like us. They too want happiness. They too want a satisfying life. But on the other hand, isn't it interesting? At least I find it so interesting. Now, I don't know anybody that goes to Yale, but my guess is, right? It's just a guess, but my guess, it's interesting to me that people that go to Yale, academic elites, people that I would imagine have a level of success or wealth or respect. From the outside looking in, it would seem like someone going to Yale has a pretty good life. Like that kind of person is pretty happy. And yet, 25% of the undergraduate population, most popular course in history, they're all there to find out how to be happy. Why? Well, here's the payoff quote from the professor. She says, our intuitions about what will make us happy are totally wrong. Our intuitions about what will make us happy are totally wrong. The things that we think will bring us happiness don't actually bring the lasting happiness that we're looking for. Now, the Bible agrees. Or we could say that she agrees with the Bible, yeah? Because the Bible has been saying the same thing all along, that the things that you and I think will make us happy don't actually make us happy. Okay, well, then what does? Let's turn to Proverbs chapter 3. Happy is a man, or we could say woman, or we'll just say the one. Happy is one who finds wisdom. So you want to be happy? You want lasting happiness according to the Bible? Well, then what you and I need to find is wisdom. Next chapter, Proverbs 4, wisdom is personified, and it's talked about like this. Do not forsake wisdom, and she will protect you. So wisdom protects us. Love her, and she will watch over you. Wisdom watches over us. The beginning of wisdom is this: get wisdom. Though it costs all you have, get understanding. Cherish her and she will exalt you. Wisdom exalts us. Embrace her and she will honor you. Wisdom honors us. She will give you a garland to grace your head and present you with a glorious crown, which is to say that to experience the happiness that you and I want, well, or I guess we could also say, to experience the life that God has created us for, the life that God wants for us, well, then the Bible's pretty clear. What we need is wisdom. It's not respect. It's not a job. It's not a relationship. It's not money. It's wisdom. Now back to that question that I asked earlier. Was that one of the things that you answered? When I asked if you could ask God to give you anything you wanted right now, is wisdom? What was wisdom? Was that one of the things on your list? See, we want to be happy. If we want to be happy, then we need to get wisdom. Okay, so how do we get wisdom, Kyle? Well, that's the question that I'm most interested in this morning. So to get the answer, we're gonna look at the Old Testament book of 1 Kings. We're gonna go to chapter 3, because it's in 1 Kings 3 that we meet someone who shows us exactly that, how to get wisdom. But this someone is not just anyone, he's a king, King Solomon, who is King David's son. And just a little context going into this passage, Solomon is at kind of a pivotal moment in his kingship. He's newish to the throne, 3 or 4 years into this role. And like anyone in kind of a new role, maybe you can relate to this. Maybe you've been in a new job or new position or a new circumstance. And you know, when we're new in a certain role or job, we're learning, right? We've got to learn. And so Solomon, he's learning too. He's learning how to do his job. He's learning how to navigate people's expectations. He's learning how to be the kind of leader that God wants him to be. And so we'll pick up his story in verse 1. We're gonna read the whole thing and then we're gonna pull some observations out of it. This is what we read. Solomon made an alliance with Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and married his daughter. He brought her to the city of David until he finished building his palace and the temple of the Lord and the wall around Jerusalem. The people, however, were still sacrificing at the high places because the temple had not yet been built for the name of the Lord. Solomon showed his love for the Lord by walking according to the instructions given him by his father David. At Gibeon, the Lord appeared to Solomon during the night in a dream, and God said, "Ask for whatever you want me to give you." So I highlighted that because that's our question, right? If God could give you anything you wanted, what would it be? That's exactly what happens. He comes to Solomon, he says, "Hey, ask me, whatever you want, ask me." What would Solomon say? Well, we see his answer. "You've shown great kindness to your servant, my father David, because he was faithful to you and righteous and upright in heart. You've continued this great kindness to him and have given him a son to sit on his throne this very day. And now, Lord my God, you have made your servant king in place of my father David. But I'm only a little child and I don't know how to carry out my duties. Your servant is here among the people you've chosen, a great people, too numerous to count or number. So give your servant a discerning heart to govern your people, to distinguish between right and wrong. For who is able to govern this great people of yours?" So God comes to Solomon and says, "Hey, ask for whatever you want." And that's how Solomon answers. And we're told that Solomon's answer was pleasing to God. And so God responds and says to him, he says, "Since you've asked for this and not for long life." Solomon certainly could have prayed for long life or wealth for yourself. Didn't. Nor have asked for the death of your enemies. I'm sure he had lots, right? He could have asked, "God, take care of these enemies." No, he prays for discernment in administering justice. And so God says, "I will do what you've asked. I will give you a wise and discerning heart so that there will never have been anyone like you, nor will there ever be." And if you know Solomon's story, you know that's exactly what happened. Solomon becomes the wisest, according to the Bible, the wisest person to have ever lived. But again, the question is how? How does Solomon get this wisdom? I want to pull out 3 observations from that passage. Well, I'm going to call them 3 paths to wisdom, okay? So the first is this, obedience. Let's go back to verse 3. Solomon shows his love for the Lord by walking according to the instructions given him by his father David. So how does Solomon love God? Well, it says by walking according to the instructions given to him by his father David. That's a reference to what we see in the chapter before this. Right before David dies, he says this to Solomon. He says, "Be strong, act like a man. Observe what the Lord your God requires. Walk in obedience to him. Keep his decrees and commands, his laws and regulations, as written in the law of Moses. Do this so that you will prosper in all you do and wherever you go. It's kind of interesting, yeah? How does Solomon show his love for God? He shows his love for God by walking in obedience to him, by obeying him, keeping his decrees, his commands, his laws, his regulations. That's how Solomon shows his love for God. He obeys him. And by the way, his obedience, it leads to prospering. You will prosper in all you do and wherever you go. See, obedience leads to prosperity. Now, it's kind of interesting because, I think a lot of times what happens when it comes to obedience is that people tend to think that obedience is a path to salvation. Obedience is not a path to salvation. Jesus is the path. Jesus is the only path to salvation. But obedience is a path to something else. It's a path to wisdom. And that leads to a happier, more satisfying, a prospering life. But that's kind of counterintuitive, isn't it? I mean, it's counterintuitive that obedience leads to prosperity. I think especially in our culture, in our time, where the thing about our culture in our time is that what we see is, right, the freedom of self. Do whatever you want, whenever you want, however long you want. So just make sure you don't hurt someone else. But generally speaking, then it's okay, right? You do you be you, live however you want. Don't hurt someone, but you do you. That's happiness, that's living, that's prospering, that's wisdom, according to our culture, but not according to God. No, it's just the opposite with God. God says if you want to be happy, if you want to prosper, if you want wisdom, then walk in obedience to me. That's hard though, isn't it? I mean, it's one thing for me to say that. It's another to live that out. Obedience, obeying God, it's hard. I'm not gonna pretend like it's not. And I think all the time my life would be so much easier if I could just do whatever I want. I say I think because I know that it wouldn't, but I think it would be. But here's the thing. The longer I've been a Christian, the more I've read the Bible, you know what I've never come across? I've never come across a Bible verse that says that obeying God's going to be easy. And yet somehow I have this expectation that it would be. I've never come across a verse that says following Jesus is going to be, following God is going to be easy. But you know what I come across all the time? It's gonna cost something. It's gonna be hard. But here's the thing. It's always worth the cost. The Bible says over and over and over, it's always worth the cost. It reminds me of an email I got several years ago at this point from someone who's now, she's in her 30s, she's here, a member at our church, but she said this at the time. She said, I remember in college going out, getting drunk, experimenting with drugs, hooking up, gossiping, social climbing, endless amounts of selfish behavior. And then one summer, I found myself studying Galatians with a few Christians, and it changed my life. It wasn't magic, but I slowly began to obey Jesus, tried to match my actions with how he called his people to live. It was really hard. There was a cost. I lost friends, social status, changed my career pursuits, how I dated. A lot of things shifted as I chose to obey Jesus. But I'm so thankful I did, because Jesus brought me life. I'm so thankful, she says, I did, because Jesus brought, you see what she's saying? She's saying, look, I was living foolishly, doing all these things, and that didn't bring happiness at all, right? It just made her unhappy. Living foolishly made her unhappy, but through her obedience to Jesus, over time, she began to live wisely, and that brought the happiness that she was looking for all along. See, the thing about obedience is, I know, it's slow, right? It's imperfect. It happens in process. It happens over time. It's not always just a light switch, but here's the thing. What God reveals on the other side of our obedience is always, always, always better than whatever our disobedience promises us. It's always better. See, obedience, it leads to wisdom. The second thing, though, that leads to wisdom is is humility. So let's look at verse 7. Solomon says, "Now, Lord my God, you have made your servant king in place of my father David, but I'm only a little child and do not know how to carry out my duties." Now, obviously, Solomon's not a kid, right? He's not a child, but he knows that he's like a child in the sense that he doesn't know what he's doing. He says as much. He's like, I don't know how to carry out my duty. I don't know how to be king. I don't know how to do my job. I think it's so interesting that Solomon, King of Israel, Solomon, is self-aware enough to know that he doesn't have it all figured out. And he's confident enough to not pretend. He's confident enough to say that out loud. He's self-aware enough to know that he doesn't have it all figured out, and he's confident enough to say it out loud. He doesn't pretend. He doesn't hide. He's the king, but he's humble. Now, I don't know about you, but I find that leadership, that kind of leadership displayed in these verses, I find that refreshing. Because I don't often see that kind of leadership. And by the way, my own life too, right? So it's not casting, so I'm just saying, myself too, what I often hear and see, people with a measure of success or notoriety or power, it's some version of, man, I worked really hard to get this and I got it, right? I deserve this thing. I'm a big deal. Look at me. Or if it's not so explicit, it's kind of implicit. We do this thing called what? Humble bragging, right? Look at how great my life is, but it also is kind of not great, right? Like, look at me, look at my life, but then we also kind of try and downplay it. Either way is a form of pride. See, here's a good test. Can you do something good or something important and not tell anybody about it? Now, of course, I don't mean never, right? Like, I'm not suggesting that we can't talk about the important things we do, the good things that we do. I'm just asking you, though, to consider, is it really hard or does it seem impossible to do a really good thing, a really important thing, and then just keep that between you and God? And if the answer to that question is yes, then maybe we have a humility problem. I say we because myself included, right? It's my same struggle with pride, my same struggle with saying, look at me, I want to be, I am a big deal. It's my same struggle. It's why I'm so encouraged by Solomon here, because he teaches me humility. He teaches me it's okay to say, hey, I don't have it all figured out. I don't always know what I'm doing. And he gives me the confidence to say it out loud. I don't have to pretend. I don't have to hide. I don't have to act. I can just be honest. I can be honest at church. I can be honest with friends. I can be honest with people. I certainly can be honest with God. That leads to the third path to wisdom, and it's this, it's prayer, right? Let's go to 1 Kings 3:9. So give your servant a discerning heart to govern your people and to distinguish between right and wrong. I say prayer, it's almost so obvious that it seems silly mentioning it, yet it's kind of the main point, right? How does Solomon get wisdom? At the end of the day, he gets wisdom through praying, through asking. It's almost like Solomon knew the words of Proverbs 2 that say, for the Lord gives wisdom. From his mouth come knowledge and understanding. God is the one that gives wisdom. It's from his mouth that knowledge and understanding come from, right? Solomon knows that wisdom is not inherently within himself. It does not come from within, nor does it come through patient hard work. No, Solomon knows to ask God because God is the one that bestows wisdom. It's a gift. It's a supernatural gift from God. It kind of reminds me of what Jesus' brother James says in the New Testament. He says, if any of you lacks wisdom, the implication being all of us lack wisdom, we should ask God. Because God gives generously to all without finding fault, and he delights to give it, right? We should ask, and God's going to give. That's exactly what Solomon does. He asks God, he prays, God, give me a discerning heart. Help me to do what? Help me to know right from wrong. Help me to administer justice. That's what kings did, right? They governed. And so what Solomon is praying, he's just asking God to give him the wisdom to do his job well, to do his job with excellence, according to God in God's ways. You see, wisdom, it's not advice. No, wisdom is skill in the art of godly living. Wisdom is skill in the art of godly living, asking God to grow our ability to do whatever it is that he's calling us to do, whatever we're doing faithfully to him. That's why Solomon prays, God, help me, give me the wisdom I need to be faithful to you right now today. I think we have a lot to learn from that kind of prayer, yeah? Like, is that our prayer? Is that your prayer? God, give me the wisdom. Give me the wisdom to parent well according to your ways. Give me the wisdom to honor you with my studies. Give me the wisdom to lead with integrity. Give me the wisdom to steward my resources that you've entrusted me. Help me to do that faithfully. Give me the wisdom to be patient with my spouse. Give me the wisdom to care more about my character than my success or my failures. And by the way, that's not a one-time prayer, is it? No, it happens over and over. It's a pursuing wisdom. It's a lifelong pursuit, every circumstance, every season. James says, ask. And sometimes it's ask and ask and ask and ask, and every time God delights to give. I don't know if this will be helpful for you, but I'm gonna do it anyway. So here's a recap. This is a recap of everything I've said so far. We all wanna be happy. How do we find happiness? Well, it's in the one who finds wisdom. How do we get wisdom? Well, we get wisdom through obedience, humility, and prayer. Can I be really honest with you for a second? When I was in my office this week, I think I had just written this down, and I was just staring at it. I just had this moment where maybe this has happened to you, maybe you can relate, or I just all of a sudden got really paralyzed with kind of anxiety, insecurity. I started to worry. And I think it's because I was looking at this and I started to wonder, is this gonna be exciting enough to them? Is this just gonna feel too basic? Are people gonna hear me say these things and just kind of be bored with it? I'm just being honest, I was just paralyzed. Then I started thinking about my son's basketball team, probably because I couldn't get any work done on my sermon. But I helped coach my son's basketball team. So imagine just for a second, a bunch of 9 and 10-year-old kids running around. It's chaos. I have no idea how it works, but it's chaos every time, all right? Like and there's a wide range of skill on this team. There are kids that have played basketball before, haven't. There are kids that love basketball. There are kids who, I'm pretty sure mom and dad just wanted them out on the court. Kids that know the rules, kids that don't know them. And it's all great, right? Like at this age, 9 and 10-year-olds, fantastic. I'm glad they're all there. It's chaos, but it's kind of fun chaos. You know what's really interesting though, coaching these 9 and 10-year-old boys that have a variety of skills? It doesn't matter if they've been playing basketball forever or not. You know the thing that every single one of these kids ask me, every practice, every game? They say, Coach, can we shoot threes today? Every time. I literally, if these kids try to shoot a three, they couldn't hit the rim. But that's all they want to do. It's just like, what? Can we shoot threes today? And so you know what my answer is? No, you can't shoot threes today. And here's the deal, I'm gonna one-up it. If you shoot a three, you're gonna go sit on the bench. Now, why do I say that? Not because I wanna steal the joy of a bunch of 9 and 10-year-old boys. No, because I wanna teach them the fundamentals, right? I wanna teach them the fundamentals, because the fundamentals, how to make a layup maybe, or how to dribble, or how to pass, or play defense, that's what grows their skill. That's what grows their love for the game of basketball. And so back to this sermon, I'm sitting in my office and I kind of started, as I was thinking about this basketball thing, I shifted from like insecurity to confidence, because I realized, hey, part of what we're doing this morning is we're just talking about the fundamentals. And that's really important. It's really important because we won't grow in wisdom if we don't practice the fundamentals. You and I, we will not grow in wisdom if we don't practice the fundamentals. You know what happened to Solomon? Solomon had a great start, right? Like if this passage, if 1 Kings 3 was all we had of Solomon's life, we'd be pretty impressed with Solomon. We'd be like, that dude's doing pretty well. He's got it figured out. The problem with Solomon though is that Solomon over time, he stopped caring about the fundamentals. His obedience, it turned to disobedience. His humility, it turned to pride. His dependence on God turned into self-reliance. And so he ends up breaking God's law numerous times. He ends up using and abusing countless women. He forces people into slavery. He starts worshiping other gods. Solomon's story does not end well. And it serves as a reminder, a warning to us that wisdom isn't just something we gain. It's also something that we lose. Wisdom isn't just something that you and I gain, it's also something that we can lose. In other words, don't presume that just because you grew wise in your 20s, you're still wise in your 50s. No, pursuing wisdom, it's a lifelong commitment. It's something that we have to practice over and over and over and keep practicing. You know, if anyone knew this, it was Jesus, right? Jesus, who, though fully God, modeled for us a lifelong pursuit of wisdom through his relationship with God the Father to his dying breath. Why? So that we could have a relationship with him. Paul in Colossians 2, he says that in Jesus are hidden all the secret treasures of wisdom. So we grow in wisdom, not just because we want to be wise people. No, we grow in wisdom through our obedience. We grow in wisdom through practicing humility. We grow in wisdom through our dependence on God through prayer. Why? Because it grows our love for Jesus. And it's the key to living the life that God created you for, finding the happiness that I think you really want. Amen. Why don't we stand and continue worshiping the one whose wisdom is worth building our life on.